It all started with Whispering Pines, a mansion that had long since fallen into ruin. Its once grand halls, now little more than the skeleton of its former glory. The locals whispered about it in hushed tones, never loud enough for outsiders to hear, but with a chill in their voices when they passed by the overgrown gates. No one dared set foot on the property after sunset. It was said that the house had claimed lives, a fact no one could explain. But every few decades, someone would vanish within its walls. The mansion had a past, a violent one. Built in the late 1800s by Nathaniel Cavanaugh, a wealthy steel magnate with a taste for the occult, Whispering Pines was more than just a home. It was a monument to the man's obsession with immortality. Nathaniel had been known to host lavish parties, inviting aristocrats and scholars alike to his estate, but there was a darker side to his opulent gatherings. Hidden in the bowels of the mansion was a chamber, its walls inscribed with ancient runes, symbols meant to summon spirits from the beyond. Nathaniel believed that by harnessing the power of these spirits, he could live forever. It is said that during one such ritual, something went horribly wrong. The air in the mansion thickened, the lights flickered, and a scream unlike any human cry was heard echoing through the halls. The guests fled in terror, but Nathaniel stayed behind, never to be seen again. His wife, Eleanor, had been found days later, wandering the nearby forest. Her mind shattered. The mansion was sealed off after that, but the locals knew better than to forget. Fast forward to the present day, the legend of Whispering Pines had grown, but like all ghost stories, it had lost some of its edge over time, at least for the Hollywood types. Jason Wells, the director of The Haunting of Whispering Pines, had chosen the mansion specifically for its dark history, believing that filming on location would give the movie an air of authenticity. It seemed perfect for a low-budget horror film. The mansion was dilapidated yet grand, the perfect eerie setting. What he didn't know was that the curse was more than just a selling point for his film. Sarah Montgomery was a rising star, known for her role in several indie dramas. She had been cast as the lead in At the Haunting of Whispering Pines, a role that could potentially cement her place in mainstream Hollywood. But Sarah's connection to the mansion went deeper than even she knew. Her great-grandmother, Evelyn, had grown up in the small town that bordered the mansion. Evelyn had worked as a servant in the mansion when she was young, long before Nathaniel Cavanaugh's disappearance. She had witnessed things, dark things. Sarah had heard stories about the mansion as a child, passed down through generations, though they had always seemed like ghostly bedtime tales meant to scare her into obedience. But now, standing in front of the mansion's imposing doors, Sarah felt an unshakable sense of déjà vu. The towering oak trees, the overgrown garden, even the smell of the sea salt carried by the wind. It was all hauntingly familiar. "Sarah, you ready?" Jason called from the front steps of the mansion, breaking her trance. She blinked, nodding quickly. "Yeah, just taking it all in." Filming had gone smoothly for the first few days, though Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The whispers had started on the third day, faint at first, barely noticeable over the hum of the equipment. But by the fifth day, they were louder, unmistakable. It wasn't just her hearing them now. The sound guy, Carl, had complained about interference in the audio, strange static that didn't match any known frequencies. But Jason, ever the skeptic, dismissed it as just another technical hiccup in a cursed old house. The mansion, however, seemed to have a life of its own. Cold spots would appear without warning, and objects seemed to move on their own, lights flickering, doors creaking shut when no one was near them. Sarah's reflection in the mirrors seemed to follow her with eyes that weren't quite her own, the figure behind her appearing more frequently with each passing day. That evening, the crew gathered in the ballroom to shoot one of the film's climax scenes. It was a pivotal moment. Sarah's character, a paranormal investigator, would confront the ghost of Nathaniel Cavanaugh. The ballroom was grand, but decaying, with high, vaulted ceilings and a massive chandelier that looked like it could collapse at any moment. The walls were adorned with portraits of long-dead Cavanaugh ancestors, their eyes seemingly following the crew as they moved about the set. The scene was tense. Sarah stood in the middle of the ballroom, delivering her lines with raw emotion. But as she spoke, she felt a strange heaviness in the air, as though the house was listening, waiting. Without warning, the chandelier began to sway. "Cut!" Jason shouted. "That's not supposed to." Before he could finish his sentence, the chandelier came crashing down, missing Sarah by mere inches. The sound was deafening, glass and metal shattering across the floor. The crew scrambled, some rushing to Sarah's side, while others backed away in horror. "Is everyone okay?" Jason's voice wavered as he spoke, clearly rattled by the near-death experience. Sarah was shaken but unharmed. She looked up at the ceiling, where the chandelier had hung moments before. There was no reason for it to fall. The rigging had been checked that morning, but as she looked closer, she saw something etched into the wood beams. Runes, the same ancient symbols her great-grandmother had spoken of. Later that night, Sarah sat in her trailer, unable to sleep. She stared at the fogged-up mirror, her heart racing. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent. They were no longer faint murmurs, but clear words, commands. "Leave," they said. "Leave this place." She grabbed her phone, but there was no signal. The temperature in the trailer dropped, her breath visible in the cold air. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the mirror began to fog again, just as it had earlier. But this time, she wasn't alone. A figure stood behind her in the reflection, its face obscured by shadows. "Sarah!" a voice hissed, sending chills down her spine. She spun around, but no one was there. Heart pounding, she bolted out of the trailer and ran toward the mansion, her only thought being to find Jason. But as she reached the front doors, they swung open on their own, inviting her in. The mansion's halls were darker than usual, the air thick with a sense of dread. As she made her way through the twisting corridors, Sarah could hear the whispers growing louder, overlapping, creating an eerie chorus that filled her mind. She reached the ballroom, where the chandelier had fallen earlier, but something was different now. The portraits on the walls had changed. The once static images of the Cavanaugh ancestors were now twisted and grotesque, their eyes wide with terror, their mouths open in silent screams. Nathaniel's portrait, however, remained unchanged. His cold, calculating gaze seemed to follow her as she stepped deeper into the room. Suddenly, the floor beneath her began to shift. The hardwood planks groaned as if the mansion itself was alive. Sarah stumbled backward, but it was too late. The ground gave way, and she fell into the darkness below. When Sarah awoke, she was in the heart of the mansion, in the secret chamber her great-grandmother had warned her about. The air was suffocatingly cold, and the walls were lined with the same runes she had seen earlier. In the center of the room stood an altar, and behind it, the shadowy figure she had seen in the mirror. "Nathaniel Cavanaugh," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. The figure stepped forward, revealing a gaunt, skeletal face. His eyes burned with a malevolent light, his mouth curling into a twisted smile. "You're one of them," he said, his voice a low growl. "One of the descendants. You've come back, just as I knew you would." Sarah's heart raced as the realization hit her. She was part of the mansion's curse, tied to it by blood. Nathaniel had been waiting for her for generations, and now he was ready to claim what he believed was rightfully his. The next morning, the crew arrived to find Sarah's trailer empty, her phone still lying on the bed, displaying an unfinished text message. "They're coming for me." Inside the mansion, The ballroom was eerily quiet. The portraits had returned to their normal state, and the chandelier hung as if it had never fallen. But the whispers continued louder now, echoing through the halls. The curse of Whispering Pines was far from over.